All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Dan Cohen. This is Uncaptured Media. Gonna get started in just a second here. I just want to, I start my videos with explaining what is Uncaptured Media? What does this name even mean? And to me, it's all about staying not only physically, but mentally, psychologically, spiritually uncaptured, free, liberated, being in a constant process of self criticism, of learning and understanding what's going on around us so we don't become captured and divided and conquered, because there are all kinds of psychological operations constantly deployed against us to break us apart and be easily ruled. And we're going to address, I think, a big one today that has sought to, what I would say is poison anti-Zionism. And I'm going to be joined in a few minutes by a great guest named Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. Maybe you've seen him on this show before. Maybe you've seen him other places, but he is, simply put, one of the foremost experts on Zionism out there. I meant to grab his book and hold it up. I just left it in the other room. So maybe when we bring the rabbi in, he'll be able to show it to you. But his book is called sorry, one second. Okay. His book is called The Empty Wagon, and it's roughly 1,000 pages and worth reading every page. It's a deep dive into the farce that is Zionism, the ideological underpinnings that explains the underlying ideological the underpinnings rather of what is happening today in the Gaza Strip. Not only this horrific genocide that we've been watching on our phones and computers for the past year, but also a lot of really the international politics and how the concept of Judaism is manipulated, smeared, altered in order to advance Zionist political agendas in the United States, for example. That's something we're seeing right now with President-elect Donald Trump saying that he's going to remove funding from universities that host anti-Semites. What does an anti-Semite even mean? That's, these are all very important questions. But I want to actually, before we get to the interview with Rabbi Shapiro, I want to examine for a few minutes this phenomenon of how I see anti-Zionism. There's an intentional effort to poison anti-Zionism. And it really seems that since October 7th, every Tom, Dick, and Harry has become an expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, on Zionism, on Judaism. And in the age of social media influencers, it's no longer knowledge or academic rigor or study or some kind of intellectual contribution that qualifies someone to speak on the biggest platforms in the world on this subject. It's just how popular they are for any reason completely unrelated. And the figure that I'm going to discuss is someone who's been making a lot of headlines lately. His name, I sadly share a first name with him. His name is Dan Bilzerian. He's been on some of the biggest podcasts and YouTube channels to talk about Zionism, to talk about Judaism, the war on Gaza. And these are subjects that he has never done any actual work on. He's never written an article, as far as I know. He's never been to Palestine. He's never been inside Israel. Never contributed anything intellectually to these fields. But what he's best known for is promoting sexual licentiousness and moral degeneracy to millions and millions of young men around the world. And that's done with a trust fund that he was handed by his Wall Street vulture capitalist father. So now he insists, Dan Bilzerian insists, that he's seen the light. He's had a, so to speak, a come to Jesus moment. And all of that degeneracy he promoted in the past is not relevant anymore. It's just all of a sudden, we should forget about it. And it's not actually people like him that are promoting degeneracy. He claims it's not the media, it's not our popular culture that's forced from the top down. It's actually Jews. It's Jews that control the media and these organizations, okay? I want to show a couple of examples. Okay. Let me just get this pulled up, share my screen. This is a very basic operation, as you might have figured out. Okay, I think this is the one. Okay, here we see. Everyone can see it, right? Yes. Here's Dan Bilzerian saying, the Jewish media has been attacking masculinity because weak men are controllable. And he goes on to praise Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader who was killed by Israel a few weeks ago. So it's the Jewish media that's spreading this degenerate culture. You don't have to look far on Dan Bilzerian's timeline to see dozens upon dozens of tweets promoting pornography, to promote, and I'm not going to pull these up. These ones I'm not going to pull up. I'll show you others as evidence. Promoting pornography, him with pictures of barely clothed women, barely wearing anything, saying all kinds of the crudest things for years and years and years. But now Dan says it's the Jews, it's the Jewish media, as if we're Jews forcing him to do this. I don't think so. Okay, this was Dan's choice to do this. Now, let's look at this one. Okay. See if I can get this one up in the right place. Here we go. We'll share this one instead. Okay. Dan Bilzerian says, the Mishnah Torah says that if a Jew has sex with a child, the child should be executed if she's not Jewish. And pulls up some screen grab he got from a website, apparently of a translation of the Talmud. Okay. Let's not even address the veracity of what he's saying here. First, let's just look at something else, some other things Dan Bilzerian has said publicly. Here's a tweet of his that's still live. Getting close to Nazi Germany in America. Life sentence given for downloading child porn online. Wow. So Dan was promoting child pornography, saying that child pornography should be, something that we should have a soft hand on. And I guess in this equation, that if the American government is like Nazi Germany for punishing downloading child pornography, then I guess the child porn users, I don't know if he ever used that, must be the Jews in this case. I don't know, or the victims of the Nazis. So that's how deranged Dan Bilzerian's worldview was, at least back in, this tweet is from 2011. Okay. So did something magically happen with Dan? Well, he never apologized for this. He never had a real come clean moment that I know about where he discussed his basically belief that child pornography should not be punished in such a, in his words, Nazi-esque way. Okay. Here's in 2019. And these are just, tweets I found on his timeline. This is not any exhaustive search. This is like 10 minutes of work. And again, I apologize, especially to the rabbi who I know is watching in the back, for showing, licentiousness. But these people have to be shown for what they really are, okay? This is Dan Bilzerian saying almost every rich guy paying for women's genitalia, leave Robert Kraft alone. There's real crime to worry about. This is from 2019. Robert Kraft is the ultra-Zionist billionaire who was caught paying for prostitutes. 2019, Dan is still promoting prostitution, okay? And ultra-Zionist billionaires defend the billionaires who are basically buying women. That's Dan Bilzerian's message here, okay? So So while conflating Judaism and Zionism, becoming a raging anti-Semite, he has also, get this, at the same time, apparently embraced Islam. Here is a tweet from Hassan Shibli, who's the head, is involved with CARE, I believe, the Council on American Islamic Relations. He says, he quotes Dan Bilzerian. I think the call to prayer is the most fantastic thing I've heard. Dan Bilzerian, reaction to hearing the Adhan. Okay. Indeed, the call to prayer is quite beautiful. I heard it many, many hundreds of times when I lived in Palestine. So Dan Bilzerian, well, becoming, and here's an important parallel to what he's doing, trying to examine the Talmud and Jewish texts, even though he doesn't know anything about them. I'm old enough to remember the post 9/11 era, when all of a sudden, when Al-Qaeda or whoever it was, supposedly Islamic extremists, carried out this brutal terrorist attack, and the climate of Islamophobia was so over the top that I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, in a suburb of Phoenix called Mesa. A guy who was hepped up on Islamophobic corporate propaganda went out and to like a 7-Eleven and murdered a clerk working behind the counter who happened to be an Indian Sikh immigrant because he thought he was a Muslim. So this is the same kind of thing they're doing now. That climate of Islamophobia that the media and the government created. Dan Bilzerian, if he were a media figure then, he'd be doing that exact thing. Now that's what he's doing with Jews. Okay. So, and at the same time, and so now the irony is he is, hanging out and trying to embrace Islam or something. Okay. Now, CARE, I want to point out, CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, has endorsed a lot of U.S. and Israeli regime change wars, in particular in Syria and in Libya. Okay? Those are, Benjamin Netanyahu was calling for those wars back in the early 2000s when he was calling for war in Iraq. And CARE supports those positions. CARE is about as close to Muslim Zionists as you can get. All right? They've also promoted the Uyghur genocide lie, which is a totally debunked lie that that the U.S. is using to destabilize China. Okay? So it's odd to me that Hassan Shibli doesn't seem to have any kind of problem with Dan Bilzerian's anti-religious rank racism, because I guess it helps them rebrand too, or something. I don't know, popularize. So now, again, you might say, well, Dan Bilzerian's his tweets about child pornography, this one, that happened back in 2011. Not relevant now. And his support for Zionist billionaire Robert Kraft buying prostitutes, buying women is 5 years old. How's that relevant? Okay. He never renounced those views. No. He just overnight rebranded, became an expert. And he got invited on some of the biggest platforms. The Patrick Bet-David podcast, the Piers Morgan show. Okay? Why? What qualifications? What makes him relevant to go on these shows? Well, Piers Morgan and Patrick Bet-David happen to be ideological Zionists. Okay? It's not, I don't think it's a coincidence. Piers Morgan, he's part of the Rupert Murdoch media empire. Patrick Bet-David is hoping for regime change in Iran. And, while you might see someone who's critical of the Israeli state and its actions, its genocide in Gaza on his show, you will never see anyone ideologically deconstruct Zionism, which is the core of the issue. And that's what we're going to do today. So there is a tacit agreement between the Piers Morgans, the Patrick Bet-Davids, and the Dan Bilzerians, where they both agree on the underlying fundamental principle, the lie that Zionism equals Judaism. They just take different approaches to it. And that's, again, we're going to go through this today. So some might say, it gets even more interesting. Some might say, Dan, why didn't you reach out to Dan Bilzerian and try to educate him? Well, in fact, Dan Bilzerian reached out to me. This was back in May. He sent me a direct message on Twitter, totally unprompted, out of nowhere. He didn't say, hello, how are you? Hey, how's it going? He didn't say, I have kind of an odd question. He just wrote to me, are you a Jew? That's what Dan Bilzerian said to me. He wrote to me, are you a Jew? Okay. I responded. I kind of cautiously responded. I wasn't sure what he was trying to get at. And I said, short answer, yes. Why do you ask? I didn't want to get into the whole thing of, well, I'm not really very religious. I live largely a secular lifestyle. It's irrelevant. But yes, I am a Jew. Why do you ask? And he responded, I'm starting to think Zionists aren't real Jews. Glad you're speaking up. And I congratulated him for getting it basically right. We exchanged pleasantries. Maybe he's using his platform for good. Maybe he's changed. I thought, maybe. Months later, Bilzerian began to publicly speak about this, and he finally spoke out publicly. And he denounced not only Israel, but the Jewish religion, as we saw. So I wrote a very polite message to him, and I offered to have an off-the-record call, a phone call, to help him understand the difference between Judaism and Zionism. And I explained to him that I think, it's fair to say I have skin in the game. I've spent quite a bit of time and devoted my adult life to this subject. And I've, dodged bullets and breathed plenty of tear gas and seen my friends killed. So this is a real thing to me. This isn't just, something to fire off some tweets about. And he declined. He wasn't interested. He wrote to me, I've concluded that the greatest threat to America and possibly the world is Jewish supremacy. Again, I wrote him multi-paragraph messages and explaining that that's not true and that his original instinct was actually correct. He just was not interested. He didn't want to have that conversation. He made up his mind. That was that. Still, I naively perhaps believed that he might be swayed. I even offered to meet him if he were ever to come to Washington, D.C., where I live. That, of course, did not happen. Then, of course, Dan began to embrace Islam. One more point about that I forgot to mention before. Let me just show this tweet. It gets even richer. I think. Okay. So he responds to someone and says, at Germany's peak of anti-Semitism, yep, everyone can see it. At Germany's peak of anti-Semitism, when Hitler removed Jews from the banking system, Germany flourished. And in 1492, the year Spain expelled the Jews, was exactly the start of their 167-year golden age. Okay. I'm gonna pause this video. I don't know why it's playing. Hitler removing the Jews from the banking system. Well, what happened? Okay, let's not forget that Hitler committed genocide against the Jews and other populations that did not fit in with his image of the Aryan master race. And that was part of Germany's decline, actually. And Nazi Germany was supported by Wall Street until the very last moment. Secondly, 1492, the year Spain expelled the Jews. Well, it's true that the Golden Age did start then as they went to conquer the Americas. And you know who else the Spanish expelled? The Spanish Queen? The Muslims. So Dan's sudden embrace of Islam is kind of funny when you consider that he supports Muslims being expelled from Spain because Jews were expelled too. Not the sharpest guy here. Okay? So what exactly happened is my question. Why did Dan have these instincts that were more or less correct, that Zionism is not, he says Zionists are not real Jews, as he put it. They're not practicing Judaism. They're practicing something else entirely. More accurate, I'd say. Something happened along the way where he joined a camp that conflates Judaism and Zionism against his own initial instincts and insists that Jews, all Jews like me or anyone else, are reigning supreme over the whole world and spreading the degeneracy that he spread throughout the vast majority of his life. This is a dangerous idea. It proposes that those responsible for the problems of the world are not those at the top of our power structures, but are everyday average people. They're your neighbors. They're people that you walk by in the grocery store, and you may not understand why this guy's wearing a yarmulke, but he's not the guy who's controlling your life, who's responsible for your problems. It's not the family that's out for a walk with the kids, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Jews, whether they're Christians, whatever it is. This is just an attempt to capture us, to divide us, to make you hate your neighbor. Okay? He doesn't want you to think it's the government officials, the billionaires, Wall Street, the people behind the curtains who are, pulling levers behind the scenes, okay? We're just people. He wants you to think it's the people just trying to get by. And the Bilzerians and the Nick Fuenteses and the Jake Shields and these kinds who constantly conflate Jews and Zionists and say that Jews around the world, they're selling their followers the exact same culture wars that they claim to rail against. So when they claim that, the Democrats and the establishment, just focus on identity and this, they are the biggest identitarians around. They are identity politics. That's all they have. Same with Zionists. Zionist is the epitome of identity politics. And more than that, they actually feed the Zionist propaganda machine, which thrives on anti-Semitism. And that's something we're going to discuss with Rabbi Shapiro. And they actually, therefore, contribute. They feed the genocidal Zionist machine that is exterminating the Gaza Strip, that is messing around American politics, influencing American politics, and driving the Middle East and the world into some kind of apocalyptic war. So I don't know what changed his mind. Who knows? Maybe he just fell in with Fuentes and Jake Shields, and Jake Shields, whose big qualification, his only qualification is that he's really good at beating people up. But got to wonder, is there something more cynical, more deceptive going on? Does Dan Bilzerian have an AIPAC handler? Because these guys are objectively doing the dirty work of the Israel lobby by conflating Zionism and Judaism. They're like walking and talking ADL reports come to life. They're just race hucksters who conflate Zionism and Judaism in the same way that the race hucksters at the ADL want you to believe that all criticism of Zionism is anti-Semitic. Their objective role is to poison and discredit anti-Zionism. But we are not going to let them do that. We're going to push back. So today, I'm joined by a man who, in a sane world, would be promoted on these massive platforms to help viewers understand how Zionism actually stole the identity of Judaism and is the furthest thing from it. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. Again, you may have seen him on my show, others. Proud to call him a friend, a mentor. And though I live a secular lifestyle, I frequently call him for advice and think of him as my rabbi. So I'm going to bring him in now. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining me.
Hey, Dan, how are you? Thank you for having me again.
Very well. Thanks for doing this. So there's so much to discuss. There's any which way we could take this, but I think the thing that our audience would really benefit from is to really get to the core of, well, what is the core issue at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What is really driving this? And it's the Zionist ideology. And it's what I was describing before is this, I think there's kind of a two-sided or a binary psyop, of a psychological operation. We have Zionism on one side and anti-Semitism on the other side. And so when you see Piers Morgan saying, Dan Bilzerian, you're an anti-Semite, you hate Jews and the state of Israel, and Dan Bilzerian says, well, they're committing genocide. So yeah, that they want us to stay inside those boundaries. Noam Chomsky talked about how effective propaganda is when you have two sides to it. You have very lively debate within these boundaries. And so what we're going to do is pull out the rug on this entire thing. So we can break free, become uncaptured, if you will, properly define Zionism, and then when we have defined it, then we can actually defeat it. So, Rabbi, if you can give our viewers an explanation as you see fit of what is Zionism and how it differs from Judaism, and then I think we'll have a lively discussion and take it any which way.
Okay, that's a big ask. A lot of things in that opening statement. But how about we start with Zionism? Explaining the difference between Zionism and Judaism is difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is not because they're so similar, it's because they're so not. If you were to ask me what the difference is between a chair and a table, it would be easier to answer than if you asked me what the difference is between a chair and a fish. Right? You would have to explain to me what the connection is, because there really is none. Zionism was invented in the late 1500s, early 1600s by the Christians. We call them today evangelicals. These are a group of Protestants. The Catholics are not involved in this, and that's very important to note, as I'll explain later. And they believe, as part of their religion, that the Jews are going to take back Israel. They're going to create some kind of Jewish state. And then there's going to be the end of days. And there are different opinions. Their Messiah comes back. After that, either Jews get converted, Jews get killed, Jews go to hell, or whatever it is. Some other opinions too, but that's basically more or less the idea. A lot of things that people think were invented by Jews were actually invented by the evangelicals. Most of Zionist ideology was created by the evangelicals, not the Jews. And actually, some slogans that people think are Jews were actually Christian. And some slogans that people think are Palestinian were actually created by the Jews. So, who invented the slogan? I'm sure you've heard it. A land without a people for a people without a land. So in the early 20th century, there were a lot of Jewish Zionists that were using that. Abu Mazen mistakenly thought it was Herzl that invented it. He once mentioned that, but he was absolutely wrong. The Christians invented that. In the 1840s, Lord Shaftesbury and Alexander Keith were using that slogan way before any Jewish Zionist ever thought of it. This was their idea. The idea that Jews should speak Hebrew in their future Jewish state was the evangelicals' idea. Theodor Herzl didn't think the Jews should or even would be able to speak Hebrew. He also thought, and this is true, that he's right about this one, that there's no purpose in it at all. But part of the evangelical ideas was that they should. Very often, Jewish, and by that I mean those who are born Jewish or identify as Jewish, such as Benjamin Netanyahu, but are completely secular. By that I mean he doesn't observe Judaism in the slightest. When a guy like Netanyahu speaks, and he speaks about the Bible, the odds are he's not speaking about the Jewish version of the Bible. He's speaking about the Christian evangelical version of the Bible. For example, he once, after he went to visit the site of the Auschwitz concentration camp, and he had made a speech there, and he said how Israel is a fulfillment of the biblical prophecy in Yecheskel, that's in English Ezekiel, chapter 37, about the dry bones, how the prophet saw dry bones coming out of the ground, and then they grew flesh and then came to life. He was saying how the Jews were like dry bones, and now they have Israel, so that's like coming to life again. There is absolutely no Jewish source in any of the thousands of years of commentaries that we have that says that. That was invented by the evangelicals a couple centuries ago, and the evangelicals still say it. In fact, all the evangelical newspapers, after Netanyahu said that, said this is wonderful. Netanyahu said that the prophecy of the dry bones is being fulfilled. It's an evangelical thing. And they invented this. In fact, a Reverend William Hechler was the one that approached Theodor Herzl in the late 1800s. I think it was 1896 when he approached Herzl, or 1897 when he approached Herzl. After he heard that Herzl wanted to make a Jewish state and create political Zionism, this reverend who was very, very well connected with heads of state, said to Herzl, let me help you out. And Herzl writes about this reverend that he was, in the most laudatory terms, about he has the face of a prophet, a long, nice beard, as opposed to Jews, who Herzl didn't like all that much. He writes about them, about their long, dripping noses and things like that. This was invented by, Zionism was invented by the evangelicals. There were Jews who later picked up the idea, but they didn't get the idea from Judaism. They got the idea from nationalism. The original Zionists were wholly, entirely secular people. Theodor Herzl was absolutely secular. He was, if it's possible to be less Jewishly observant than Netanyahu, Herzl was. Herzl, in fact, he had this dream of converting all the Jews to Christianity, which he wrote about in his diary. One Sunday afternoon, he had like all the specs worked out also. They didn't like Jews. The Zionists will have you believe that Zionism was created as a response to anti-Semitism. Say Jews have to find a safe place to live, to be free, self-determination, so that they wouldn't be bound to anybody, they won't be defenseless, they won't be vulnerable. So we'll start with a question about that. If you observe what's going on in Israel, or even a cursory knowledge of the history of Zionism, you'll see two things happening. You'll see on one hand this business that the Zionists will tell you about how they need Israel to escape anti-Semitism, that everywhere else they're vulnerable, they're a minority, right? So you would think that it's a utility project, as simply self-defense or self-preservation, that's it. At the same time, there's something weird, because if that's true, then why all these ideological Jewish components to Zionism? Why Palestine? The Zionists had other places to go, like Uganda, Kenya today. Why speak Hebrew? Why indeed not follow Herzl's plan? It was a difficult thing to create modern Hebrew. They actually created it. And the question is why? If all you want is a safe place, come there, speak Yiddish like most of the Zionists spoke, or speak Russian or some language. Herzl had a whole plan, Swiss, some such language. Speak more than one language if you want, like they do in many countries, Canada, Belgium, etc. Why did you have to create Hebrew? Not only did you create Hebrew, it wasn't out of convenience, it was out of ideology. They would actually beat up and harass Jews that spoke Yiddish, because no, you have to speak Hebrew. The Uganda plan, there was people who wanted the Uganda plan. It was outvoted in the Zionist Congress, and one of them, I believe it was Max Nordau, if memory serves, somebody tried to shoot him because Max Nordau, a traitor to the Jewish people. Why this ideological connection to Palestine, the ideological insistence on Hebrew, on Palestine? Why this Jewish component? How much of this is just an escape from anti-Semitism, in which case it wouldn't make a difference what language you speak or where you go? In fact, I'll tell you an interesting historical tidbit. At the Zionist Congress, when they were voting about the Uganda plan, there were almost no Orthodox Jews that sided with the Zionists. I'll explain shortly why. But those that did, they were looked at as renegades. They're called the Mizrahi Party. Later, they founded the Mizrahi Party, or Rabbi Reines and his group. They had voted for the Uganda plan, and they said this. They said, all we want with Zionism is a safe place to be. That's all we want. These were considered the religious Zionists. So why not Uganda? But the secular Zionists insisted on Palestine. So you have all this ideological stuff going on. They'll tell you the Jews, how all the time the Jews pray towards Jerusalem, the historical connection between the Jews and the Holy Lands. So this is not the same. This is like a parallel thread of Zionism that has nothing to do with the idea of escaping anti-Semitism. Is there something intrinsic about Jews and a connection to the Holy Land, to the Hebrew language, or the modern Hebrew language, which never existed really? It's not a resurrected language. They completely changed the language. But they try to give it old Hebrew flavoring, but it's a new language they had to invent. They went out of their way to get Palestine as opposed to anywhere else. They went out of their way to speak Hebrew. What is this Jewishness, this Jewish part of Zionism versus the self-preservation part of Zionism? So, I mean, we'll start with that. Was Zionism a way to escape anti-Semitism? Or was it some ideology, some Jewish ideology? And if it was a Jewish ideology, why did it start mostly, or almost exclusively, with Jews that not only did not believe in Jewish ideology, meaning the Jewish religion, they actually loathed it? So the answer to this is that the idea that Zionism was created in order for the Jews to escape anti-Semitism is political propaganda. And that's not me speaking. That besides historical fact, Shlomo Avineri, who in my view is Israel's greatest political scientist ever, in his book, The Making of Modern Zionism, he says it clearly. But if you look at the history of Zionism, you could figure this out for yourself. You don't need any authorities. At the first Zionist Congress, Max Nordau had mentioned that Zionism has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Even if anti-Semitism would disappear off the face of the earth, we would still create Zionism. And the reason is because they believed that anti-Semitism wasn't merely something to escape. It was something that the Zionists agreed fundamentally with, that the Jews, as they were before Zionism, were ugly, disgusting, immoral, weak, unmanly, and all etc. Vladimir Jabotinsky, who was one of the founding fathers of Zionism, right-wing Zionism, his political party that he created, the Revisionists, is pretty evolved into what today is the Likud party. He held a eulogy on Theodor Herzl in 1904, where he explained what a Zionist is. He said, he called them Ivrim, meaning Hebrews, as opposed to a Jew. The Zionist, he said, it's hard to describe because there's nothing to compare it to. So what you do need to do is to compare it by contrast, to contrast it to a Jew. Take every character trait that a Jew has, he said, and imagine its diametrical opposite. What you come out with, that's a Zionist. Because Jews are weak, Zionists will be strong. Because Jews are ugly, Zionists will be handsome. Because Jews are cowards, Zionists will be courageous. Because Jews are disgusting, the Zionists will be charming. So if you want to know the difference between Judaism and Zionism, it is literally, and again, it is not me talking, these are the Zionists talking. This is from Jabotinsky in a eulogy about Herzl. It's the actual opposite of Judaism. It was a social engineering project, mainly to try to change the Jews. They believed that if you change the Jews and you make them normal, meaning with different aspirations, different values, different personality traits, if you make them more like, let's say, Ariel Sharon or Benjamin Netanyahu, as opposed to being like me or being like the rabbis of the old Yishuv, then anti-Semitism will disappear off the face of the earth because there'll be no longer any reason for anti-Semites to hate Jews. Theodor Herzl wrote, it's the climax of his book, The Jewish State, it's the last page, that as soon as Zionism gets off the ground, even before a state of Israel is created, anti-Semitism will disappear off the face of the earth. They believed that the Jews need a social engineering project, they need to change, they need to be more warrior-like. They need to become part of history, they said. Because Jews, we were a religion. We only aspired to, as the Bible says in the book of Psalms, Shivti b'veis Hashem kol yimei chayai. King David tells God, there's only one thing that I ask, to sit in the house of the Lord all my life, to bask in God's glory, and that's it. That's all we wanted to do, to pray, to study our religion, to fulfill our religion, and leave us alone, and that's it. This led to substandard personality traits because the whole world values warriors, they value athletes, they value artists, and the Jews had no interest in that, not because there was anything intrinsically bad about it, except the warriors that we do have an aversion to, but it's just not our job. The Jews are a religion and it's a lifestyle, Judaism, not merely a belief. And this wasn't what we were interested in. The Zionists felt that the world looks even at secular Jews, that even secular Jews remind them of the Jewish religion, which besides had a lot of baggage in the Christian world in Europe because they said we killed Jesus, and the Jews suffered a lot of anti-Semitism for that. But on top of that, in the Enlightenment world, in the world of the Emancipation, where science and art and athletics is all valued, in the secular world, a Jew has no place. And if they just normalize the Jews, that will end anti-Semitism. The plan to normalize the Jews was to change them from a religion into a nationality. And this is the main point of Zionism.
Maybe I can say one thing about that before we continue, that I think will help people understand. Zionists needed every national group, especially we're talking about 19th century European nationalism, which had come into fruition in relatively recent times. And in order to build this idea of a nation, you need not only a language, you need a shared history or a mythology. And in the case of the Zionists, because they were inventing a nation, they didn't have any actual nationality. They were just putting this whole thing together and making it up as they go. They took the Jewish religion and tried to nationalize and mythologize it. So concepts that are holy and otherworldly and supernatural suddenly became something that you would they lost all their meaning, and you just do them through you accomplish them, you change the meaning of them and accomplish them through political means. And when you're talking about, for example, national heroes or how they wanted to change the Jew from a pious and passive religious person who is interested only in following the religious lifestyle as the Torah commands, they looked at warrior figures from the Bible and sought to cast themselves as those warriors, but not understanding, and feel free to elaborate this, not understanding that in Judaism, those warriors are not considered heroes because they fought and they didn't win battles and wars in the Bible because they had the best weapons or knew how to throw punches or use a spear or a sword. But it's actually because they were pious and God rewarded them. So feel free, but I want to add that I think it kind of really highlights the difference.
Yes, what the Zionists did, yes, they needed a language, they needed a land, they needed a flag. Jews never had a flag, so they invented a Zionist flag, which existed before Israel did. The Jews didn't really speak one language. The Jews were all over the world speaking all sorts of different languages. No, the Zionists invented some Jewish national language. We had no national territory. We had no interest in one. The Zionists invented this national territory. Here's the thing that you're saying. Anything that Judaism valued was for its spiritual value. That's it. Jews, like other religions, I imagine, value spiritual things. The Palestine, the Holy Land, was valuable because it's a holy land. A synagogue is holy. The Holy Land is holy. certain days of the year are holy more than others. Sabbath is more holy than a weekdays. Yom Kippur is more holy than even Sabbath. And there are certain places in the world that are more holy than others, and the Holy Land is one of them. Jerusalem, even more holy than the rest of the Holy Land. But it's the holiness which means closeness to God. The Zionists changed all of this to political aspirations and political value. Israel became from a holy land to a national homeland. They changed Jewish history, and yes, it went. Jabotinsky was right that a Zionist is literally the diametrical opposite of a Jew, because the Jews, not only did we value, as the Bible says, Hakol Kol Yaakov Hayadayim Yidei Esav, when Jacob, Esav's brother, came and he took the bracha of the blessing from Isaac of the firstborn, which he thought Esav deserved, but really Esav didn't deserve. The father, Yitzchak, Isaac, says, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esav. This is a well-known verse that Jews use as a description of the difference between Jews and people who don't practice Judaism. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esav. Jews are not people that use their hands. They use their voice. We're supposed to pray. We're supposed to study. Hands meaning the warrior, like Esav was, that's not Jew. But not only that, it's not only a question that in the Bible there are righteous people and warriors. Even the warriors in the Bible, according to Orthodox Judaism, were portrayed not as warriors. Those are other religions that portray them as such. They are portrayed as holy rabbis. Joshua, King David, King Saul, King Solomon, they were, I'm not trying to convince you that Judaism is right. I'm not trying to convert anybody. But if you want to know what Judaism says, this is what it says. Joshua was a righteous rabbi. His victories were only because he was righteous enough to deserve to win, and they were all miraculous, just like the walls of Jericho fell miraculously and the Jordan River split miraculously. Everything that happens were all God's doing, and things happen miraculously. There's a story that I'm going to tell. I've told it to many people that illustrates this really well. And it explains what in Orthodox Judaism a Jewish army consists of. In the days of the Enlightenment, there was a great ideological battle waged by the Maskilim, the people of the Enlightenment, the Jews, people like Moses Mendelssohn, against the what we would call today ultra-Orthodox Jews, the more traditional Jews. And in one of their pieces of literature, the Maskilim, the Jews that wanted to modernize Judaism, they made a skit. They made a skit to mock traditional Judaism, and the skit went as follows. The Jews were recruiting an army, and the Mashuach Milchoma, the priest that recruits soldiers for the army, gets up and he says, okay, guys, we need to fight a war. And we need to fight a war means, by prophecy, we know we need to fight a war. The Torah, the Halacha says we're supposed to fight a war here. We need recruits. Who volunteers? A whole bunch of people come. And he says, all right, hold on. But according to Jewish law, not everybody is allowed to fight in the Jewish army. If you just built a house, you go home. So a bunch of people went home. You just married somebody, just got married, newlywed, you can't fight. Go home. If you are not righteous enough, if you are a sinner, even a minor sinner, you can't fight in the army because we need righteousness. That's why we win wars. A bunch of people went home. If you're scared of the enemy, that means you don't trust God enough. That means you don't trust in your own merits enough, your own spirituality enough. Go home. At the end of the day, at the end of the recruiting process, out of the thousands of people that volunteered, only 2 people were left for the whole army. Imagine the scene, like a whole crowd of people, thousands, and then everybody empties out, and you have this empty field, and 2 elderly rabbis were left. That's it. One was Rabbi Soloveitchik, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and one was Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan. And one was very tall, the other rabbi was very short. And they were like I guess you would call them the elder rabbis of that generation. And it was funny, and it was a mockery. So a bunch of Jews Orthodox Jews went to Rabbi Soloveitchik and said, we want to answer them. What should we say? We don't want to be mocked. So he said, okay, let me see the transcript of this play. And he looks at it, and while he's reading it, as he's reading, he is agreeing with everything that the play describes. These people went home, yes, that's right. This is right. Everything is right, he says. Everything they said was true. They just left out one part. We won the war. And that's how we portray, Orthodox Judaism portrays Jewish personalities. It was not a guy like Ariel Sharon, a guy like Netanyahu, a warrior would not be allowed in the Jewish army. Only righteous people whose prayers and whose spirituality causes God to create miracles. And that's how Jews won wars. And again, this is religion. If you don't agree with my religion, fine, there's no problem. But this is what Judaism says. The Zionists did not like this at all, so they changed it to the opposite. And not only did they make Joshua into, God forbid, a genocidal maniac, but they made him then, the fictitious Joshua that they created, they made into a role model for themselves. Or, for example, in Israeli schools, that's one of the most required parts of the Bible that they have to teach is Joshua. It's not like it's required to study the Psalms or Proverbs, the wars of Joshua. But not only that, even in more recent Jewish history, in the days of the destruction of the Second Temple, about 2,000 years ago. So we know there were a group of Jews called Baryonim, thugs. When the Romans had a siege around Jerusalem, these guys insisted on fighting the Romans and making war. They were rabbis. Their leader was named Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He wanted to negotiate, make peace with the Romans, to go out and say, we have no gripes with you. We surrender. Just leave us alone. We're not interested in war. That's it. The Baryonim threatened any Jew that tries to wave the white flag or to negotiate with the Romans with death. Rabbi ben Zakkai, he snuck out of the walls of Jerusalem in a coffin. They faked his death. And he went to the Roman general, and the Roman general said, well, you have these Baryonim over here, and they made kind of a compromise that the Romans definitely destroyed Jerusalem, but they spared certain things left over that would contribute to the continuity of Judaism. But if not for the Baryonim, we could have made peace with the Romans. Certainly, we would have had a much better chance. In Judaism, in Orthodox Judaism, Rabbi ben Zakkai is a hero. And this episode is a lesson of what Jews should be like and who Jews should not be like. The Baryonim are villains in our history, and Rabbi ben Zakkai is the saint, to borrow a phrase from another religion. In Zionist literature and Zionist history, the Baryonim were the heroes, and Rabbi ben Zakkai was the villain. In fact, Jabotinsky had a youth group, Bris HaBaryonim. They're not embarrassed to call themselves by the name of thugs. There's a song, you could find it on YouTube, the Song of the Baryonim, and it's literally the opposite of the pacifist Jew, pacifist, peaceful Judaism. It's the opposite, and they propagandize Jews by saying you must be like this because look, there's anti-Semitism and we have to fight the anti-Semites, and that's our only hope. They were saying Jews are hopeless, they'll kill us anyway. We may as well fight back. We may as well go down fighting. We may as well die at least like lions than live like dogs. They're going to kill us anyway. That's the theme that they used a lot. We have hope. We're hopeless. The whole world hates us. They all want to kill us. We may as well fight back. And they've been doing this for 100 years, trying to convince the Jews that the rabbinic and Judaic aspirations and values are wrong, and that the aspirations of the warrior and values and ethos of the warrior and the baryonim, the thugs, they are correct. Not only in that path lies the only way to survival for Jews, not only is that the only way to respond to anti-Semites, but that will fix the Jews and make them normal. Now, you may ask at this point, somebody who's listening to this can raise their hand. Hey, Rabbi, you just said that Zionism was not designed to fight the anti-Semites. It was designed to change the Jews. Now you start talking about them telling the Zionists telling the Jews that, well, we need Zionism in order to fight anti-Semites. And yes, that's exactly what happened. The root cause of Zionism was to change the Jews.
Can I pause you? Mm-hmm. Sorry. Can I pause you for a moment? Mm-hmm. Just interrupt a couple things. I didn't say at the beginning of the stream, please press, if you're watching on YouTube or wherever you're watching, please like, share, comment, try to spread this. Very much appreciate it. I do see comments, and I'll make sure we incorporate some of the comments and questions, and we'll get to some of them later. So that's technical housekeeping, I guess they call it. I just want to enrich a bit what you're talking about with the Bris Habirionim. The Bris Habirionim were actually the first Zionists they were a branch of the revisionist Zionist movement, Jabotinsky's revisionist Zionist movement, that they developed an ideology called maximalist revisionism, which was even more extreme than standard revisionist Zionism at the time. And I can even we could show a picture of who these guys were. Let me see if I can pull this up. You can even just look on they're on Wikipedia's fascism page. But I'm a what do they call it? I'm a deprecated source. I'm not allowed to be cited as a source on Wikipedia. So Wikipedia
really
is not. Yeah. Wikipedia is very much a controlled. Like pretty much everything, controlled information. So here are the you can see the Habirionim right here. These three guys. These were the leaders of them. One of them, the one in the I believe the one in the middle, his name was Abba Achimer, and he the Jabotinskyites were admirers of Italian fascism in particular. They sought to make a quote unquote Jewish version of Italian fascism, a dictatorship and totalitarian dictatorship. And Achimer, we can see him here even better. In particular, you can see not a religious man. This guy completely secular. He even was writing praising Hitler and Nazism. And Jabotinsky basically had to tell him to knock it off. Like, you're going too far. We can praise Italian fascism, but Hitler is a step too far. So this is the Habirionim, the Bris Habirionim. That was these guys. And they are really, there was a national poet, Israel's a poet at the time, who was part of the Habirionim, one of the three leaders named Uri Tzvi Greenberg, who I know you wrote about in your book. And he had the way he viewed, and we can talk about this more later, but the way he viewed the Temple Mount or the Al-Aqsa compound was whoever controls that controls the country. And you'll see, this past Jerusalem Day, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, he said that. He quoted Uri Tzvi Greenberg. All the big right-wing Israeli public figures and politicians and intellectuals, they all see this guy, Uri Tzvi Greenberg, as a national poet. It was after 1967 that he kind of went from sort of an underground scene. He wasn't very popular, and all of a sudden he exploded into national consciousness, and now he's seen as this brilliant national poet who was ahead of his time. So that is, and these are the guys who name themselves after, as seculars, name themselves after this group of thugs who were reviled by Orthodox Jews. So I just wanted to add that. And then lastly, feel free, please. Super chats are very much appreciated. Any contributions? I have the ticker running across the bottom, which is kind of annoying and unsightly. But if anyone wants to contribute, we do this for free for the benefit of the public. So please feel free to contribute in any way. And any super chats, I'll make sure to read and get any questions answered. So sorry to interrupt. Please go on, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you for the comments. That was very useful for the audience, I imagine. So these guys wanted to change the personality of the Jews, and the way they got the Jews to buy into this, because you see, Zionism is really, in essence, an attack on Jewish identity. It's more of an attack than any of the deviant Jewish movements or the offshoots that came out of Judaism, even those that started other religions, because all those movements, although they started other religions, they all agreed Judaism's a religion. The Zionists came up with this new idea: let's change the Jews into a nationality. I mean, by way of analogy, if I want to do this to the Muslims, what I would do is now the Muslims are a religion. They have an Allah, God, they have prophets, they have their religious laws. What I would do, and this is what the Zionists did, say, you know what, their holy sites aren't really holy sites. Those are national, but the Ummah, the Muslims, the Jews also have this word. Ummah means like a people, a society. Ummah really means a nationality, and the Muslims are a nationality. We'll make a Muslim flag. We'll say it represents Muslim national pride. We'll say that the whole Quran and the prophets of Islam aren't really what makes you a Muslim. That was just the religion of the Muslims, in the same sense that, let's say, the Greeks had a religion, Zeus, Hercules, etc. But the fact that you're Greek has nothing to do with whether you practice or believe in the Greek religion. The same thing with Islam. Islam is a nationality. Whether you believe in Muhammad or the Quran, that doesn't make you a better or worse Muslim. What makes you a better or worse Muslim is the same thing that makes you a better or worse American or better or worse Frenchman. If you're willing to fight for the Muslim nation, if you're willing to be loyal to the Muslim nation, if you're willing to combat the enemies of the Muslim nation, if you're willing to build the Muslim lands, these holy sites, they'll be national sites. If you're willing to build it up and plow them, it's the plowing and the planting, and be an upstart, Freudian slip, be a startup nation. And this is what the Zionists did to the Jews. And in order to do it, yes, they changed history. They educated a whole group of people, and children mostly, and they started from the younger generation. And to your point about Jabotinsky, he had this political party, the Revisionists, and then he had his youth groups, the Jabotinsky youth, the Beitar youth. These guys, the youth, were much more extreme than the adults, because the youth are much more flexible. And yes, they later got even too militant for Jabotinsky. It wasn't only those guys that you described. Menachem Begin, who was a student of Jabotinsky, Jabotinsky condemned him for his excessive militarism. But getting back to this, the way they sold this to the Jews, they said, look, Jews, listen, you may not agree with us. You may not agree that the Jews are a nationality. That's all fine and good. But you want to buy into this because we're going to protect you from the anti-Semites. We're going to protect you from the pogroms. We're going to have an army, and we're going to have the interests of the Jews in mind. We're not interested in nationalism. We're interested in self-defense. Now, to other audiences that were interested in nationalism, they said, we're interested in nationalism. After the Holocaust, then the Zionists had the best propaganda possible. Look what happens without Zionism. Look without Zionism, without the fulfillment of the Zionist aspirations, namely a Jewish state. Look what happens when we don't have an army. Look what happens when we don't have a state. Had there been an Israel, then of course there would be no Holocaust. Israel would take their atomic bombs and blow up Hitler. No Jews will be persecuted anymore. If Soviet Russia persecutes Jews, Israel's going to come bomb them. Excuse me, I'm sorry, that didn't happen. But Israel promises to protect Jews wherever they are. In Argentina, if there are juntas, generals, governments that persecutes Jews, Israel will protect them. That didn't happen either. When the Jews went to the Israeli embassy, they shut their door on them because the Israeli government had a deal with this Argentinian government then. So Israel promised the Jews that, okay, you'll be safe. However, under the hood, there was this whole nationalism and this transformation of the Jewish people. So there were the secular Jews. Most Orthodox Jews didn't buy any of this. First of all, they knew they couldn't trust the Zionists, not one word that they say. Number two, they weren't interested in the Zionist protection. They figured that it's just going to make things worse for the Jews. And many secular Jews believed that as well. And when the Balfour Declaration was made in the early 20th century, from England, there was one member of the British cabinet that was Jewish. His name was Edwin Montagu. And he said, no, Zionism is bad for the Jews. If you make the Jews into a nationality and give them their own state, what that means is that the American Jews are not American, the British Jews are not British, they are foreigners in their own countries, and that's not a good thing. That's literally an anti-Semitic dual loyalty trope, which, for the record, Adolf Hitler said in Mein Kampf, chapter 2. He said that the Jews don't belong in Germany because although there are religious Jews that claim their only religion, it's not true. They're their own nationality. And he said any doubts that Hitler had about this, the Zionists solved for me, because the Zionists clearly are Jewish nationalists, and the other Jews don't condemn the Zionists. And the truth is, they did condemn the Zionists. The Jews condemned the Zionists in no uncertain terms. But Hitler wanted the Jews to be a nationality because he was an anti-Semite. So that's what he preached.
I gotta say, let me just interrupt real quick. I mean, you know, in the passage that you're referring to from Mein Kampf, Hitler calls the Zionists a great nation. He or a great movement. He calls them a great movement. Whether that's how he thought later, but I mean, I think basically saw Zionists and said, "Oh, this is actually, this is a legitimate, a good thing." Whereas, Jews were awful, and so it's kind of funny to me to see that how so many, figures like Bilzerian and Fuentes and these guys have tried to rehabilitate Hitler's image, and basically doing just to rehabilitate his image. That's a very uncomfortable truth to them, that Zionism actually legitimized Hitler's views of what he thought the Jews were, and he actually called them a great people. So
even if you believe that the Jews are nationality, of course, that doesn't justify throwing them into Auschwitz.
Of course.
But the idea, yes, Hitler agreed with the Zionists that the Jews are a nationality, and the fear of the Orthodox Jews and secular Jews such as Edwin Montagu was realized when Hitler said, yeah, well, they're not real Germans. And the Zionists continue to push this anti-Semitic trope by saying that Israel is the state of the Jews. Remember that Israel is different than all other countries in the world. All countries in the world are the countries of their citizens. Israel claims not to be the country of the Israelis. We know by Israeli law there's no such thing as an Israeli nationality. There's the Jewish nationality, this Zionist idea, this idea that the Nazis agreed with, this idea that Hitler used, of course, as a pretext to say we got to get the Jews out of Germany. They're not real Germans. The Zionists actually spread. They say the Jews are all part of one nation, and Israel is the nation state of the Jews. Israel's not the nation state of the Israelis by Israeli law, the nation state law of 2018. Israel's the nation state of the Jews. So here we have the foundations of Zionism. That's what it was about. The question that many people are going to have is, wait, if Zionism was a completely secular movement, which it was, a completely anti-Jewish movement, which it was, a completely anti-Semitic movement, which it was, then why are there even religious Jews that are Zionists? Take, for example, the the cast of characters of settlers in the Israeli government. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, I don't know how religious they really are, but they wear yarmulkes. They portray themselves as religious, and look at the settlers. So the answer is this. There was one man who's responsible for this, basically. The old Zion, there were religious Jews who, as I mentioned before, like Rabbi Reines and his people, who were not nationalists. They did not buy into this idea that Jews are a nationality, nor did they buy into the idea that this Jewish state that Herzl was going to create has really anything to do with Jews or Judaism. It has to do only with finding a safe place for Jews, which is why they wanted Uganda. But then there was a Rabbi, Abraham Kook. Religious Zionism, as we know it today, national religious Zionism, Dati Leumi, it's his fault. What he did was, he was a nationalist, and he believed in nationalism wasn't just marching bands and militarism. There was a whole philosophy around it. There were actual nationalist philosophers, and they had various different philosophical beliefs about what a nationality is and what a nation is. Some of them believe that's not merely a corporation like Google. That's him. That's Rabbi Kook.
There you go. I pulled up an image. I pulled up an image of Rabbi Kook.
Right. It's not a corporation. It's not a mutually beneficial construct for all of its citizens, but rather there's something organic. This is like ethnic nationalism. There's something intrinsic and organic about being a Englishman. Something inherent in being English that the French people don't have. Of course, this ideology led down the road to racism, but there's all sorts of different nationalist philosophies and how there are ideas, Hegelian ideas about how the nation, just like a human being has a mind, a nation has a mind, so to speak, for itself. A nation thinks for itself, and people are like cells in a nationality. It's a whole philosophy about what binds people together. There's something almost mystical to it, almost spiritual, not in a God-centric religious way, but in this fuzzy kind of New Age spiritual kind of thing. And Rabbi Kook believed in this stuff. He actually said he brought nationalism into Judaism. He wrote Jewish religious texts, and he used ideas that no Jewish scholar ever heard of before. These type of ideas about how the Jews, how building up the Jewish nationality is actually following the spirit or the mind of the nation, and the spirit of the Jews is really God. So you're really part of your soul, without getting into the details, part of your soul, even if you hate Judaism, even if you are not religious, but if you're a Zionist and you work for the advancement of the national cause, then part of your soul is higher and better than an Orthodox religious Jew that is not a Zionist. And everybody looked at these things, these Jewish scholars, like, where did this guy get this stuff from? It's so bizarre. It's so ridiculous. What these Jewish scholars, many of them did not know at the time, but today we know, it turns out, that he took nationalist philosophy, Hegel, Bergson, Albert Schweitzer, even Spinoza. He took their ideas, regurgitated them without quoting any of them. He basically plagiarized their ideas, but he changed them. He put them into Jewish mystical type language so that it looks deep and mystical. And probably Rabbi Kook, and he was a deeply religious man, but he had this, like the idol worshippers in the olden days, in the days of the Bible. They were religious Jews, but they worshiped the Baal as well, until Elijah the prophet told them, look, you either want to follow the Baal or you want to follow God, but make up your mind. Rabbi Kook, Elijah the prophet would have told Rabbi Kook and the settlers today, you either want to be a nationalist or you want to follow Judaism, one of the two, because nationalism, according to the Jewish religion, is idol worship because it literally changes the entire story of the Jews, the entire identity of the Jews. But he made a mix of secular nationalism, portraying it as if it would be some kind of mystical part of Judaism. He was actually a pacifist, and the seculars, the religious Zionism, the national religious, is based much more on secular Zionism than it is on Judaism. Totally. The Zionism itself has more in common with evangelical Christianity than it does with classic Judaism. And the national religious has more in common with secular Zionism, just kind of a Judaicized version of secular Zionism, than it does with traditional Judaism as well. And Rabbi Kook, now there are two strains, of course, of Zionism. I mean, and many gradations in between. There's the left wing and the right wing. We mentioned Jabotinsky, he was the right wing. Then there were the labor Zionists, who were more like socialists. Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky were arch enemies. Ben Gurion once called, maybe more than once, Jabotinsky Vladimir Hitler. They didn't like each other. One was the right and one was the left. They were more like fascists. They were more like socialists. Rabbi Kook was more like the left-wing Zionist, that there's this more, some kind of organic, more even like this land connection between people and the lands that pagans believe in, tilling the land. Rabbi Kook incorporated these foreign ideas into his Judaism. And of course, he had a great following amongst the secular, because, hey, the secular now have a doorway to God without even having to be religious. Now, he did say that they have to be religious, but he was kind of like very, very mixed up. There is a method to this madness, but madness it is. And certainly mixing Judaism into, secular nationalism and various different foreign ideologies into Judaism, masquerading as Judaism. He was condemned by so many Orthodox Jewish rabbis and scholars as either a idol worshiper, a heretic. There's another rabbi. He was in Palestine in those days. He took a look at his stuff and he said, "You know what? I'm not judging him. Could be he's possessed by something. Could be he's possessed. Could be something's the matter with him. But his material is absolutely beyond the pale." Okay?
Was he considered a kook?
So
Somebody stole the joke from me.
I'll tell you something. There was a great rabbi in the Holy Lands. His name was Rabbi Karelitz. He's known by the name of his magnum opus, Chazon Ish. And the word cook, by the way, in Yiddish means look. It's used mostly as a verb, like look at this. So the Chazon Ish said about Rabbi Kook that his hell is going to be, his punishment is going to be, that they're in heaven and up in the next world, they're going to show him what his ideology caused, and they're going to tell him, cook, look. But he was a pacifist. He cannot be blamed for wars or anything like that, because he actually, I agree with the people that have the opinion regarding his philosophy that he would not have allowed the state of Israel to be created when it did, because he said that he had this idea that I think he really believed his stuff. I think he really believed nationalism was an actual, true, correct philosophy, and kind of like a science. So, and he mixed it into Judaic beliefs, but he believed that through the Jewish state, there's going to be peace in the world, and it's going to be peaceful, and there's not going to be wars, and everybody's going to want to be part of it. He had this romantic idea of what a Jewish state is about, which did not include fascism or anything like that. His son, however, Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who was really the founding father of the settler ideology that exists today, was a militant. Now, if you're going to ask me, how did he become militant if his father was not? The answer is, using their methodology of the elder and younger Kook was based on cause and effect, reasoning, proof texts in Judaism, that would be a valid question. I could see that somebody would be bewildered about that. But being that they had all these mystical, romantic, more their kidneys, adrenal glands, and heart decided their ideology than their scholarship. So wherever your kidneys lead you, that's where you're going to end up. And their son was a militant, and he incorporated, and his students incorporated a lot of the Jabotinsky Zionism into their ideology. They had, and they have this idea about messianic ideas, which the Christians had. You know, not only does a lot of the secular Zionist slogans and ideas come from the Christians, but a lot of the religious Zionist ideas also do. So, for example, what the religious Zionists called Aschalta de Geula, the beginning of the Messianic days, the beginning of the redemption. The evangelicals had that first. They believed that the Zionism and the creation state of Israel was the beginning of the end of days, and whether the religious Zionists copied the evangelicals, whether they were influenced by them, or whether they were influenced by the people they were influenced by, or they copied their idea, or they got it independently. One way or the other, they have messianic ideas about end of days, very similar to the evangelicals. They have mixed Jabotinsky's militarism together with guys like Aaron David Gordon, his land-based pagan kind of Zionism. And I want to tell you, people ask me all the time, and I've seen it online recently, about how what you mentioned that things that Israel does represents Judaism. Two things about that. Thing number one, Israel does not claim to be motivated by the religion of Judaism. When Israel was created, as I said, it was created as a purely secular state. They refused even, against the pleadings of the religious sectors, to mention God in their Declaration of Independence. They refused to mention God. In America, we have "In God We Trust" on all of our dollar bills, and we have "One Nation Under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. But Israel refused to mention God in anything, in their Declaration of Independence, in their national anthem. By the way, anti-Semitism isn't mentioned either. In the Declaration of Independence, it describes the history of how Israel was formed. It doesn't say anything about finding a safe place to escape from the anti-Semites. Their national anthem doesn't say anything about escaping the anti-Semites. It talks about the yearnings that Jews always had to return, which is a distortion, a nationalist distortion of the religious desire and yearnings we always had for a spiritual messianic end of days, where the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and there won't be any wars anymore, and God will reign, and the whole world will recognize God, and everybody lives happily ever after. Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu himself is a completely secular guy, to the point where there was something that happened in Poland a while ago. I think it was about 10 years ago, maybe off by a couple of years. There was a movement in Poland to disallow the Jewish ritual slaughter. It's called Shchita. They wanted to implement into Polish law that there are only certain ways that you can slaughter animals. The Jews, of course, said that their religion requires this type of slaughter. And it was mentioned amongst the Polish government and the parliament or wherever that, well, how could the Jewish community say that they need this ritual slaughter? The prime minister of the Jewish state, Benjamin Netanyahu, was here, and he didn't say he needs kosher food. In fact, it was offered, and he said, "No, I don't need kosher food." And if he could eat the non-ritual slaughter, if he could eat non-kosher food, then why does the Jewish community say they need non-kosher food? And by the way, in Israel, in Netanyahu's party's opponents, the opposing party's Knesset members, they brought this up. And MK Aliza Levi, her name was, she had mentioned this about how Netanyahu misrepresented Judaism. But he didn't really claim to represent Judaism at all. Everybody just assumes that, well, if it's the state of the Jews, it's associated with Judaism. But the fact of the matter is, Israel has nothing to do with Judaism. Israel runs according to secular law. There is nothing in Israel that has to do with Jewish law. Yes, Saturday is there, is like Sunday in America, but not because the religion says so, but because nationalities or countries have a day off. And in order to give it what I call artificial Jewish flavoring, artificial Jewish coloring, they have Sabbath. They have Saturday. In fact, at the beginning, when Israel was being created, there was a lot of tension, and more than tension. There was a war between the religious Jews and the Zionists, the secular Zionists, Ben Gurion and his gang. The religious Jews were very worried that the Zionists would force the Jews not to be religious. And the Zionists, the secular Zionists, worried that the religious Jews would try to tell everybody that the Zionists really don't represent Judaism, in which case people may oppose the creation of Israel. The religious Jews had different camps. Some said, yeah, we're going to oppose them. We're going to say we don't want this we don't want this Jewish state, and they did. Others said, look, the Jewish state is going to happen anyway. Let's make a deal with the devil that because it's going to happen anyway, at least let's let them allow us to keep Shabbos. Let's let them allow us to stay out of their army, which is an indoctrination camp for Zionist ideology. At least, so they made deals with Ben Gurion, and they said, look, we will be silent and we won't oppose you in the UN if you allow us to just keep our religion and don't bother us, okay? They thought they were going to lose anyway, so they may as well make a deal. Other Orthodox Jews said, no, we're not making a deal with the devil. We're going to oppose it anyway. And even today, there are Orthodox Jews that refuse to be in the government, and there are Orthodox Jews that are in the government, but they're in the government not because they're Zionists. You know, the Arabs had the same debate amongst themselves, whether to join the Israeli government in the Knesset. They have Arab parties just recently in the Knesset, but there were other Arabs that said, no, we're not going to join with these guys. The Orthodox Jews had the same type of debate and the same split in their opinions. But Israel, even though it looks, there's a lot of overlap between it and Judaism, people need to understand that it's not religion that causes Israel to use the lunar calendar. It's not religion that causes Israel to make the Jewish holidays, the religious holidays, their national holidays. It's not religion that causes them to make Saturday their off day as opposed to Sunday. On the contrary, they took Jewish concepts and changed it into secular ones in order, A, to portray themselves as the Jews and to portray Jews as them. They want people to think that Jews always were national and that the Jews' holidays and day of rest were always had a national component to it, which it did not. But since Israel does, they want to figure the Jews always did. And they want Jews to say, okay, look, we're not opposed to the Jews so much. We're similar to you. And the conflation between Judaism and Zionism, well, that's the business the Zionists are in. But the Zionists want, when it used to be that the Zionists knew that no Orthodox Jew would buy into them, and they had to make deals. Okay, we'll give you Saturday. We'll make sure the food is kosher in government installations. We'll make sure that you will be allowed to keep your religion. Those days are gone. Today, because of Rabbi Cook Sr. and Rabbi Cook Jr., you have many, many, many religious Jews that are Zionists. Now, people ask me all the time how many religious Jews are really Zionists. And the problem is, it depends what you mean by Zionism. There are two reasons why people, Jews and non-Jews, support Israel. And we say support Israel, what does that even mean? The Zionists will tell you that Barack Obama was a big anti-Semite and he was anti-Israel. That's what the right-wing Zionists say. Even though Barack Obama was the one that afforded them the missile defense system. What was it called? The Iron Dome. The Iron Dome.
And also, gave Israel all the weapons to carry out the 2014 Gaza slaughter, which I witnessed personally.
You were living there then, I think.
What's that?
You were living there then?
Yeah, I went there as a journalist in 2014. I went to be based there, and that was the first time I went into Gaza, was the last 10 days of the 51-day war on Gaza, and all of those weapons and diplomatic and political support were provided by Barack Obama, just like, until this genocide has been supported by Joe Biden, even though all the Israelis will say, oh, Biden is anti-Israel, we have to have Trump.
Okay. Well, yeah, they said that if Biden wins the election, Israel's dead.
Right.
Now, that's the problem. That's the politics over here. There are people, Jews and they're Jews. There are many Jews that believe that unless they believe those politics, that if the Democrats win, so Israel would be dead. And they don't want Israel to be blown up. They don't want people to be killed. And they believe the politics, not because they're Zionists. This applies to Jews and non-Jews in Western countries that, well, yes, the Palestinians want to kill all the Jews and they're all ISIS and they're all Hamas, etc. This is politics. This is not religion. This isn't even Zionism. There are many people here in this country that believe that. Then there's Zionism, which means a theological or religious or ideological promotion of Israel as the Jewish state. But because of all the different gradations that Israel went through, because of this whole evolution, when you ask somebody, do you support Israel? When they tell you how many Jews are really Zionists, if you notice, almost always, they switch in the middle of their sentence to, okay, Jews are so many Zionists. They took a survey and they said, these Jews support Israel. So you're going to get if you ask a Jew, are you a Zionist? Let's say he says no. Then you say, do you support Israel? He says, well, what do you mean support Israel? Do you want Israel to be blown off the face of the earth? Of course not. Okay, this Jew supports Israel. Jew supports Israel. That will make him a Zionist. Okay, so all of these terms the Zionists manipulate. They manipulate the term Jewish state, Jews, Zionist, supporting Israel. And they do it on purpose. And the end goal is to override, supersede, to steal Jewish identity and to say there is no difference between Zionists and Jews, to change the identity of the Jew from classic Jew being Orthodox religious Jew to Benjamin Netanyahu Jew, or today a settler Jew. The anti-Semites, by the way, have the same agenda. They want Judaism to be conflated with Zionism, as you mentioned. And the Zionists and the anti-Semites both give people the same ultimatum. I wrote about this today. The ultimatum is like this. Either you are anti-Zionist, which means you want all the Jews to be killed, which means you're against the Jewish people, because after all, Israel's the only thing that makes the Jews safe. Or you support what Israel's doing. So what they want, what the Zionists want, is for people to say, hey, all right, here are my choices. Either I support Israel, or if I don't, that makes me an anti-Semite. So look, here's the thing. Most people, when they decide their political positions, they don't really know a lot about what position they're taking. They watch a couple of videos, they'll read a newspaper, they'll have a very cursory knowledge of what's going on, and then they'll make a decision. Over here, they say, look, okay, I don't know everything about this situation, but what position should I take? Well, one option is, all right, the Jews are doing such terrible things. The Jews are so terrible. They're so bad. Or Israel's right. Those are the only two options. Well, if I say Israel's not right, that means the Jews, why? Because they're Jews. Because Judaism, this is what the anti-Semites say, and the Zionists, that Judaism is, the religious Zionists say Judaism is what's running this. The secular Zionists say, no, this is what the Jews need for survival. This is a Jewish identity. This is the Jewish self-determination people. This is the fulfillment of Judaism. So I'm either against the Jews, but if I am against the Jews, well, that'll make me an anti-Semite. Who was the one that said all Jews are bad because they're Jews? Well, if I go through the list of people with a record of saying that, I don't want to be on their side. So even though I may really, everything else being equal, say I don't like something Israel's doing, I may be critical of a policy of Israel, but everything else isn't equal. My only other option is to join the long list of people that say Jews are bad because they're Jews. So both the Zionists and anti-Semites want to create this false dichotomy. They want to give everybody an ultimatum. The Zionists are gambling that people will say, all right, look, I don't want to be an anti-Semite, so let me agree with what Israel does. The anti-Semites are gambling that people will say, you know what, I can't agree with what Israel does. It must be that, yeah, it's the Talmud, it's the Jews doing it again, and the Jews, look how bad they are. And it's a win-win situation for both, because it's not easy to make people into Zionists. So if you tell them, well, your only two choices are Zionist or anti-Semite, then they may say, all right, you know, I don't know much about Zionism, and I don't really want to agree with Zionism, but look, I know a lot about anti-Semitism, I know about the Holocaust, I'm not interested in being that. So given those two choices, I'm taking B, I'll be a Zionist. Or I'll support Israel. Or at least I'll not criticize Israel.
Yeah. Maybe I can...
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Go ahead. I mean, and this is exactly, you know, in my intro at the beginning, or my monologue, we can call it, about, you know, this debate between Dan Bilzerian and Piers Morgan. This is
sorry if I can interrupt for a second. I had to come late. I didn't hear much of your introduction. So
all right. Okay, but this is precisely the phenomenon that I was describing. I laid out exactly the two sides that they want you to stay inside of, and exactly what you're describing. It's like, if you stay within this paradigm that Jews equal Israel, then you will you have to stay, you either support genocide or you hate Jews, and you know, which of course has led to genocide in the past. So either way, you're basically a genocide supporter, is what's going to happen. And this is precisely exactly what we're seeing play out, what you're describing, Rabbi, in the media today, with Dan Bilzerian versus Piers Morgan. And what I'm saying, and what I laid out in my monologue, is why is it that these people, Dan Bilzerian, for example, or Nick Fuentes, or Jake Shields, or, you know, I mean, we can there's a laundry list of these figures who have zero qualifications, who have zero background, who have done zero to study, to take an objective look at this issue, this ideology. Why are they being promoted to the biggest platforms in the world? Piers Morgan, Patrick Bet-David, because those guys are Zionists, Patrick Bet-David and Piers Morgan, and they want this controlled opposition of Dan Bilzerian to say Jews are bad, look at what they're doing, killing babies. And so they want, every morning when you wake up and look at your phone and see the horrors from Gaza, the Zionists don't mind that. They're perfectly happy with you seeing that. They just want you to stay in the psyop, to hate Jews, and then that that anti-Semitism then justifies their state and the genocide. So it's like you by hating Jews, what you do is you put a log on their fire. They thrive off the negativity.
What a funny thing today or yesterday was, so somebody I know was attacked on Twitter for saying something critical about Israel, and oh yes, no, I wasn't even critical about Israel. She said, forget about that. See, that's exactly the point. She said that what the Zionists are doing has nothing to do with Judaism, and she was attacked for that. But the people who attacked her, the Zionists, didn't defend Israel. They didn't say, "Hey, no, Israel's not committing a genocide. Why are you saying that?" That's not what they said. They said, "You think you know about Judaism? You're not even a religious Jew. You admit that you never went to Jewish school." You know, so they want, and then she comes and she says, "Hey, these Zionists want people to think that Israel's doing bad things." Okay, and the truth is, you know what this reminds me of? Now they could have said, you see, these are Zionists. They could have said, "Hey, no, Israel's innocent," but they didn't even say that. They said, "How could you separate Judaism and Zionism? It's Judaism that's running what Israel does." Max Nordau had said at a Zionist Congress, he said, nobody should think that our Zionist movement has anything to do with the Jewish religion, with Judaism, because it didn't. And guess who objected to him in the exact same way that people objected to, this was Katie Halper that said this. Guess who objected to that? Rabbi Cook. Rabbi Cook said, I heard reports that Max Nordau said that Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. He said, what a terrible thing to say. What an anti-Semitic thing to say. He says, this is worse than the decrees like to kill the Jews. What a terrible thing. This is poison for our beautiful movement of Zionism. This is the idea that Judaism, that Zionism, even secular Zionism, they admit they're secular, is really Judaism. How, where? No, it's the opposite. The anti-Zionist Jews get their anti-Zionism from the Talmud, these three oaths that people know, these ideas about what the wars of Joshua and the Jewish wars really were. This is not biblical. This is all Talmudic. All the anti-Zionism comes from there. And the Zionists wanted to eliminate the Talmudic and rabbinic traditions and emphasize only certain parts of the Bible, of course, selective. But Rabbi Cook said, no, how dare somebody saying this was a Zionist he was criticizing? How dare you say that Zionism doesn't have to do with the religion of Judaism? What a terrible thing to say. And he attacked him just like people today want to keep it, just like Zionists and anti-Semites want to make Zionism and Judaism the same thing. And the most ironic thing about this, the most nefarious thing about this is that, you know why they say Zionism is Judaism? So Rabbi Cook had all these fake mystical things that he lifted from nationalist philosophers and wrote it over in Hebrew to make it look Jewish. But what would a guy like Benjamin Netanyahu say? How would he connect Israel with the Jewish people? Can I take 30 seconds and get a book?
Sure, feel free.
Okay, give me 30 seconds. I'll be right back. Got to go to the next room.
Okay. I'll yeah, sure. While we're waiting for the rabbi to get his book, the super chat from I think we're showing it there. Yes, from Chris, watching ponies. Again, super interesting. What is the Holy Land according to the rabbi? And which one of his books should I read if he had to pick one? The book to read from the rabbi, I'm not sure if it's the only one he's published in English, but is called The Empty Wagon. If you Google The Empty Wagon, you'll find that book, and it's I think one of the most important books deconstructing Zionism from start to finish. So you're with us. You're back, Rabbi. So we had a question. Yeah. We had a super
about my book.
Yeah, somebody in the last couple of minutes asked what your book is, and they also asked what is the. I don't want to interrupt you because you're in the middle of something, and maybe I'll just. But he also asked, what is the Holy Land according to the rabbi? But we can address that question later
gladly.
if you like.
So yeah. By the way, if you're going to buy my book, don't buy it from Amazon. It's way overpriced over there. go to, I don't know, look in Google for it. Z Berman Books. It's a Jewish book distributor, seller. That's the distributor. Z Berman Books, if you want it. But I have over here a book, not by me, by somebody who I really don't like, Benjamin Netanyahu. It's called A Place Among the Nations. The idea is that the Jews now, through Zionism, have a place among the nations, right? As I explained before. And this is on page 88 that I'm reading from now. He's explaining why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, because it's strange. I mean, if you're a Rabbi Cook, you could imagine that you could make up some stuff about Judaism that doesn't exist, and nor could he bring any evidence that it does, but you could say in his imagination it has to do with Judaism. But what is a guy like Netanyahu going to say? So this is what he says. I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist, is the equivalent of, quote, I'm not anti-American, I just think the United States shouldn't exist. Okay, meaning that without the United States, there's no such thing as an American identity, correct? Without France, there's no such thing as a French identity. Without Japan, no such thing as a Japanese identity. And just like a person cannot say that I want an American identity, I want Americans to exist, but I don't want America to exist, because without America, you're not an American. So too, without Israel, there's no Jewish identity. Now, again, here's that trick that the Zionists posed. Without Israel, there certainly is a Jewish identity. Jews existed before Israel. We exist without Israel. The Messiah will come. There won't be an Israel anymore. The Messiah will make everybody serve God and be religious, and there won't be an Israel. And we exist now independently of Israel. What he should have said is that you cannot have an Israeli identity without Israel. But what, like, as Avigdor Lieberman wrote on Israel's website, same idea in different words, what France is to the French and Japan is to the Japanese, Israel is to the Jews. If you want to know what Zionism is in a nutshell, this is Zionism. Without Zionism, what France is to the French, Japan is to the Japanese, Israel is to the Israelis. But because of Zionism, Israel made sure that there's no such thing as an Israeli nationality according to their citizenship census. They said there's only a Jewish nationality, and Israel is the state of the Jewish nationality. Israel is only a doing business name. Israel doesn't really exist as a nationality. The Jewish state, the so-called Jewish state, does. It's the state of the Jewish nationality. And therefore, Netanyahu says that if without Israel, there are no Jews, there's no Jewish identity. And that is anti-Semitic. The conflation between Judaism and Zionism to say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, that is anti-Semitic, because that presupposes, and it's not me talking, this was Benjamin Netanyahu. I just read it straight out of that book, that Jewish identity, being Jewish, depends on the existence of Israel. That says that A, the Jews are a nationality, and B, Israel is the creator of that nationality, the maintainer of that nationality, the state of that nationality. And without Israel, there is no Jewish identity at all. That's anti-Semitic, absolutely anti-Semitic.
Let me, I pulled up a very interesting statistic that I think kind of illuminates what you were talking about. You know, this idea that people have that Israel is acting out of some kind of religious, out of Judaism, and this I think this statistic actually shows quite well. I pulled it up before, but so this is a study that was recently done, published this year, I think about 2 months ago, by an Israeli professor who named Moti Mbari, who's actually a professor at University North Carolina. I can't remember which one, not at the UNC in Chapel Hill, but anyway, a professor in North Carolina, university professor, Israeli, possibly American, dual citizen, I don't know, but Israeli. And he recently, and this was before October 7th, he and a colleague did a survey on, among many things, belief in God in among Israeli Jews. And I think these statistics are quite revealing. So, if I'll just kind of read them off so people can see, but this is among Israeli Jews. I believe in God as described in the Jewish tradition, 63.6%. So almost 2/3 of Israeli Jews believe in Judaism, essentially. So that means
Right, the question was believe in God or Judaism?
believe in God as described in the Jewish tradition.
Okay, okay. Muslims may also say yes to that.
Sure. I
In
mean,
theory.
but so and then they break it for the others. I believe there is some other higher power or spiritual force in the universe,
Mhm.
but I do not believe in God as described in the Jewish tradition. That's 22%. And then the other one is I do not believe there is any higher power or spiritual force in the universe, atheism, 14.4%. So basically more than a third of Israeli Jews do not believe in Judaism whatsoever, in even what they think of as Judaism. Even if we discount, if we conflate Judaism and religious Zionism and all of the mixing up, that if we go along with that, more than a third of them do not believe in Judaism. And so, but we don't see, for example, a third of Israelis saying, well, I don't believe in Judaism, so therefore I'm not going to participate in society or participate in Israel's wars or go fight and kill in Gaza or Lebanon. Because what is driving that is not Judaism, it is nationalism. That's why the overwhelming majority of Israelis, uh, do
Yeah,
that.
I
Yeah, go
can
ahead.
add to that.
Sure.
This question was just about people who believe in the God of Judaism. Not they didn't ask them, do you believe in Judaism? There are plenty of people, you know many, I know many, that say, yes, I believe in God, God meaning the Jewish God created the world, but I don't really believe in the religion. I don't believe there was a Moses who got the Torah on Mount Sinai. That's a completely different question. You could imagine how many, these are the ones that don't believe in a God altogether, or the Jewish God altogether, right? How many who do believe in a Jewish God, and your listeners, I'm sure, can identify with this sentiment, don't believe in the religion of Judaism or don't practice the religion of Judaism. That's the Israeli, and more than that, the most religious Jews in Israel refuse to serve in the Israeli army. They're protesting, they're saying that we'd rather go to jail than serve in the Israeli army. So there are the settlers, you have that religion, but I must say, and this is so important for people to understand, people for every other religion, I don't know about every other religion, but the what they call Abrahamic religions, people understand that amongst the Christians, there are evangelicals. And if somebody would go to the Pope or the Catholic Church and say, why don't you do something about these evangelicals? You should protest against them. The Pope's going to say, excuse me, I'm Catholic. Catholic Church, we have nothing to do with those guys. They're not even proper Christians, okay? Everybody understands that Catholics and Protestants, and even amongst Protestants, the evangelicals are just a subsection. But everybody understands that you can't go to the Catholic Church and say, okay, all Christians are responsible for what the evangelicals did, because, or rather, because the evangelicals did it, that means look what the Catholic Church believes. Okay, amongst the Muslims, there's the Sunni and the Shia, right? Amongst the Jews, the Zionist Jews are further from non-Zionist Judaism, from my Judaism, than the evangelicals are from the Catholic Church. And to say, well, you're both Jews is like saying the Catholics and the evangelicals are both Christians. And to say, well, you're both Orthodox Jews is like saying the evangelical Christians and the Catholics are all religious Christians, because the name Orthodox has no copyright. Anybody can call themselves Orthodox. They are Dati Leumi, national religious, or in America, they have a name for a lot of, called modern Orthodox. They even have different names, but bottom line, however you're going to do the taxonomy or the labels, really, Zionist Judaism, religious or non-religious, is a different religion. We consider it absolute idol worship. And we believe that Elijah the prophet, just like he told the Orthodox Jews who were Baal worshippers in the days of the Baal, Ad Mosai atem poischem al shnei haseifim, im Hashem hu Elokim l'chu acharov. How long are you going to straddle the fence? If God is God, go worship him. Go follow him. If the Baal is God, go follow him. The same thing, he would tell the Zionists the same thing. How long are you going to straddle? How long are you going to, how long are you going to play both sides? If Judaism is true, go follow Judaism. If Zionism is your religion, go follow Zionism. Go be like Netanyahu. Go be like Sharon. Go be like Jabotinsky. Go be like Ben Gurion. But what do you want with Judaism? It's a completely, it's an idol worshiping religion. And really, people coming to Jews like me, who for not only my work has been going on for decades, but for generations, for over a century, our Orthodox Jews have been saying we have nothing to do with the Zionists, and Zionists are not practicing Judaism, like Jews for Jesus. It's like coming to me and saying Jews for Jesus believes in Jesus. That shows all Jews believe in Jesus. It doesn't matter how many there are. I don't know if there's a majority of Protestants or Catholics. Actually do. The Catholics outnumber the Protestants, I think. I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter. It's two completely different religions. Look, I'll give you an example of where religion, even though religion is invoked, religion plays no part. Vivek, he said that, now he's a Hindu, all right? He's a Hindu.
We're talking about Vivek Ramaswamy, the politician who ran for president and is now in the Department of Governmental Efficiency with Elon Musk.
Right. So Vivek said that Israel should get whatever they want because they're on a divine mission from their divine country, on a divine mission, divine people, which is all religious talk. This guy is a Hindu. So clearly, even when Zionists use religious talk, it has nothing to do with Judaism. Believe me, Vivek is not professing Judaism over here. I don't know Zionism and Judaism are two completely different things. And honestly, I don't know a whole lot about Hinduism, but just as distant Hinduism is from Judaism, Zionism is even more distant from Judaism than Hinduism, from what I understand about Hinduism. They're certainly both different religions.
A couple things I want to get to. We
have questions. The guy about the Holy Land.
Yeah, there are a few super chats I want to get to, some of which are directly related, some of which are sort of less directly related, but people contribute money, and I feel I hold true to that promise. Firstly, I know you've seen, and I talked about it in my monologue, that we see all kinds of screenshots, screen grabs, quotes from the Talmud going around Twitter, X, on social media as evidence that Judaism is this horrible religion that preaches or teaches all kinds of sinful things that and the Talmud is a guidebook for these sort of things. So I really want to kind of demystify this because I think a lot of these people, or I think a lot of instances where I see this from the Bilzerians, these types, are totally in bad faith. But I think there are a number of people who really genuinely do not know and don't want to be anti-Semites or hateful or anything, but just don't know. And so I think that makes it worth just explaining what are these quotes people are getting, what is the Talmud?
Okay, so first, what the Talmud is, the Jews believe in the Bible, what the Christians call the Old Testament, as do the Christians, as do the Muslims. But we have three completely different religions. What makes Judaism different from Christianity what guarantees that Judaism is different than Christianity and Islam and many other religions that broke off from Judaism, such as the Tzaddukim, etc., is what we call the oral law. So it's the interpretation of the Bible. But we believe, our belief is that when God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, he was there for 40 days and 40 nights. It wasn't just the 10 commandments that he got. It doesn't take 40 days and 40 nights to get 10 commandments, but rather Moses in his prophecy was taught by God the keys to understanding the Torah, not merely the written Torah, what we call the Bible. Bible, it means like book, not only the book itself, but the entire understanding and interpretation of it. There could be disagreements in the same sense that there are disagreements about the Constitution. Without going into much detail, it's the Talmud is pretty much a recording. And I say recording because once upon a time it wasn't even written, it wasn't even allowed to be written because it's oral, so as not to put it in the same category as the Bible, to make the distinction, and for various reasons, it was actually taught generation by generation, teacher to student, but eventually it was written down because it wasn't, it was too difficult for people. It's a recording of various conversations of rabbis, not just rabbis, leading sages, whose words are, well, they're the experts in Judaism, and they are considered authorities. There are various different parts to the Talmud, which we don't have to go into. There's earlier parts, later parts, but the Talmud was recorded in Bavel, which is today basically Iraq. There were 7 generations of rabbis who were who comprised the main part of the Talmud, meaning the Gemara. The Mishnah was earlier, but basically it's a recording of the teachings. Imagine classrooms. Imagine going into a giant academy, and we had academies in Pumbedisa, Nahardeh, Sura. These were academies along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And imagine recording or transcribing various different segments of classes. Now, of course, it wasn't organized with an index or anything like that. And there were various discussions. And these discussions were put together pretty much into what we call the Talmud. Now, because of the non-indexed nature of the Talmud, and because there were all sorts of different opinions and classes and contexts for each class, it's very difficult to understand exactly what the Talmud is talking about. And this is why an expert in Talmud, somebody who could decipher what's going on, is greatly admired. It takes a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge, and it's a lifetime pursuit. I want to tell you something about that. My 25th wedding anniversary, a personal anecdote. The Talmud is about 2,000 folios, about 4,000 pages, and it has no punctuation, very few paragraph markers, no vowels, and there are so many ways. And the reason it doesn't is because since this was just a transcription of classes or discussions by rabbis, just like any transcription, if you're a court reporter, you need to know where the comma is, where to put a period, where to put a comma, semicolon. But because it was orally handed down, nobody had the authority to commit themselves to putting in punctuation. So we have 4,000 pages of unpunctuated, very rarely even paragraphed discussions from all sorts of different discussions. Some of them seem randomly put in certain place, but it's not random. For my 25th wedding anniversary, I made a surprise party for my wife. But besides taking her on a trip to down to a nice exotic place for our anniversary. The real celebration was, and my wife appreciated this much more than the trip, I had completed a cycle of studying the Talmud. It took me many, many years, 20 years it took, even more. And for my 25th wedding anniversary, we invited people. It was a whole surprise party for my wife. There are rabbis, friends of mine that came. What a beautiful way, they said, to celebrate a 25th anniversary, because it's not easy. It's not hard to read the Talmud. It's hard to understand what it really means. Now, these anti-Semites, the quotes are all completely out of context, fake, or even from books that don't exist. And they mix and match different quotes. So if you tell them there's a book, God Shas, that's quoted. I don't even know what they quote from there. There's no such book. Libra David, no such book. The quotes that they have. So if you have a rabbi in a class that says, okay, so you can kill the Gentile, all right? And that's one of the quotations. But what was the class talking about? And what was the rest of the sentence? And what did he mean? So if you look in the commentaries, so there are all sorts of different explanations, none of which, not a single explanation says that Jews can just kill Gentiles. It is prohibited. And part of the question is that in other places in the Talmud, it says you can't kill Gentiles. Jews are not allowed to do anything that is morally destructive. You can't even harm an animal. You can't cause pain to an animal. You certainly can't kill human beings. It's not allowed. But that particular class. So if you can reconcile all the different contradictions and explain what the source is for this, that would be nice. So you look in the commentators, you'll see various different things. One thing, for example, that yes, it's talking about a war. There was a class. Remember, this is a discussions or class. That class was referring to a war. And Gentile people came, anti-Semites, pagans, to attack a Jewish town. And there was a war. And now the question is, are you allowed to kill somebody in self-defense, even if they were good to you in the past? The answer is yes, you can kill him, even though he was good. So some of the there are other explanations in the commentators too. So come the anti-Semites and say, look, it says a Jew can kill a Gentile even if he's good. Okay. So all of the quotes are like that. I'll give you another one. It says child rape, something about having relations with a girl under 3 years old. It doesn't say that's permitted. That's absolutely a disgusting act. And what the Talmud just says is that if that happens, the girl is still considered a virgin when she grows up. Regarding various laws and that have to do with virginity. So all of these things are such nonsense. Here's the rule. 1, there's a law, natural law that Jews believe in, that anything immoral, anything damaging to people, even if it's not explicitly prohibited by the Bible doesn't tell us all morals. The Bible tells us certain biblical prohibitions. But if something is not prohibited in the Bible or by Talmudic law, it doesn't mean it's not prohibited. It doesn't mean it's permitted. So all of these quotes, I'll give you an example. It doesn't say anywhere in the Bible or in the Talmud what the prohibition would be if you blow up somebody's house. We know it's prohibited because you have to pay him back, but it is prohibited. The question is where? It says thou shalt not steal. Well, you didn't steal anything. Stealing technically, according to the letter of the law, and this is also Talmudic, the elements of offense means you take it for yourself. The truth is blowing up somebody's house is prohibited. It's disagreements as to what the prohibition is. But the Bible doesn't tell us all moral laws. There are certain things that the Talmud says clearly is not prohibited by biblical law, but you're not allowed to do it because it's disgusting. That's all. And not only that, but rabbinical courts have the authority to keep society civilized with whatever, by enacting whatever laws and restrictions they deem necessary. So number one, the Talmud is a biblical interpretations, but it's not even interpretations. It is a snapshot or transcript of disjointed classes or discussions that different rabbis have had in different topics. Now, yes, if you're really skilled, you'll be able to figure out what the pattern is, why this particular discussion was here. You'll be able to reconcile the contradictions. It's very similar to being a diagnostician. Being a Talmudic rabbi is similar to being a diagnostician. You come in and there's a symptom of one disease, but it can't be that disease because that would be a contradiction to a different symptom. Or there's another symptom that seems to contradict the first symptom. If you're a good diagnostician, you could make everything align. If you're not skilled, you can't. Same thing with rabbis. It's a tremendous skill to be able to align everything in the Talmud and prove that this is the case, just like diagnosticians do. You interpret the Talmud, and the Talmud interprets the Bible and also transmits traditions that were given to Moses outside of the Bible as well. But the word interpret in English has two very disparate meanings. You can interpret a poem, which depends on your feelings and your prior biases and how you look at your worldview in general. And you can also interpret an X-ray. The difference between interpreting an X-ray and interpreting a poem is that where an X-ray is concerned, there is an objective correct answer. You just may not know it, and there may be disagreements about it. Interpreting a poem, there really isn't. That's what they taught us in school. There really doesn't have to be an objective answer. It means to everybody something different. Interpreting the Bible is more like interpreting an X-ray. There can be disagreements, but that doesn't mean that everybody just interprets it the way they feel or the way they want or based on what it means to them. The Torah, the Bible is not a poem. It's the Word of God. And the Talmud is the activity of interpreting it. Now, after the Talmud, the activity continued. Before the Talmud, there was interpretations as well. The Talmud is just a put together transcription. Today it's a transcription. Again, without punctuation, without an index, without table of contents, just a dump. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in the when computer people say a dump of data. It's like a dump of data in terms of what the rabbis were teaching in classes. So no, none of these things these anti-Semites spread are true. Besides which, and this is extremely important, none of this has to do with Israel. Listen, I have a message for all the anti-Semites out there. If you don't like the Talmud, leave Israel alone. Israel has nothing to do with the Talmud. Zionism wanted to erase the Talmud and just go biblical, according to their interpretations, not the Christian fully, and it's not the Muslim interpretations, their own interpretation. If you don't like Jews, leave Israel alone, because Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. If you don't like Judaism, you don't like Judaism, leave Zionism alone. It's me you're after, all right? If you attack Zionism because you don't like Judaism, then you, Mr. Anti-Semite, are also a Zionist. Zionism means the connecting of Israel to the Jews. Zionism means Japan is to the Japanese what Israel is to the Jews. Any connection between me as an American Jew of Polish descent practicing the religion of Judaism with some country in the Middle East 6,000 miles away, that's Zionism. If you, anti-Semite, want to connect me with Israel, you're not only an anti-Semite, you're a Zionist. If you want to be an anti-Semite, then I'll give you advice how to be an anti-Semite. Leave Israel alone. Leave Zionism alone. That has nothing to do with Judaism. It's me you're after. It's my religion you're after, not theirs, because that's the wrong religion if you don't like Judaism.
So I have, thank you for that, Rabbi. It's, we appreciate the in-depth explanation. I think it's interesting to see the comments. Some people are very, very appreciative and of what you just laid out and totally understood it, and others, remain in bad faith. So, maybe to be expected, but I hope that was enlightening for those who have been wondering. So I have about 15 minutes left before I leave, before we close it out. So I just want to go through some super chats. The first one was, he asked which book you recommend. You address that to get the Empty Wagon, and don't get it from Amazon. Find it from, again,
Z. Berman Books.
Feel free. A moment of not shameless, but proud promotion.
Identification.
Of what?
Station identification, they used to call it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So this is Uncaptured Media. I'm Dan Cohen, interviewing the one and only Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, author of The Empty Wagon, one of the most important books on Zionism. What is Zionism? What is Judaism? That will help you really uncapture yourself from the Zionist deception. And
thank you for the kind words. I am humbled.
And so again, where should people find this book?
Z as in Z. Z Berman, Berman Books.
Okay. So better go to
just Google it. Just don't get it from Amazon. It's really overpriced there.
Overpriced, and it's better to support independent booksellers and publishers than Jeff Bezos. So let's see. We have a few other questions that are sort of not quite related. All right, this one's: Zionist agents were said to cause explosions, and we can both take this. Zionist agents were caused to set explosions, causing Iraqi Jews to migrate to Israel. Will this kind of behavior happen now with so many Jewish people leaving Israel? Do you want to?
Yeah, it could very well be. Yes, I wrote about that in my book, The Iraqi Affair, and if I'm not mistaken, it's Avi Shleim that wrote a whole book about it just recently. Worse, though, than the Iraqi affair, and more famous, is the Lavon affair, where Zionist agents blew up stuff in Egypt, and they were actually caught. At the end, Israel admitted that. Israel never admitted the Iraqi bombings. But yeah, sure, that certainly could happen. Look, the fact that Israel is spreading anti-Semitic tropes about how Jews are all loyal to Israel, and even Jonathan Pollard said that American Jews should spy on America for Israel, and he would advise them to. They even expect them to. All of this is anti-Semitic tropes, and anti-Semitism is good for Israel because, yes, the response of Israel is, okay, everybody has to move to Israel. So I would not be surprised, is my answer.
Yes, I mean, as you know, I think one of the phenomenon we're seeing, of course, as Israel's military losses mount and it finds fewer and fewer successes, aside from committing genocide, but does not achieve any kind of military victory, whether in the Gaza Strip or in Lebanon, and loses soldiers, it's, of course, needs more and more Jewish bodies to fill those ranks. And so we've seen the attempts to forcibly conscript Orthodox Jews who are not Zionist into the ranks of the military. And there's a very hard struggle that these Orthodox Jews have been waging, which I was actually in Palestine, as the state of Israel, not long ago, 2 months ago, and I went to one of these demonstrations, and I mean the beatings that I saw these Israeli police mete out to these Orthodox Jews were very shocking. I've never, it just shows the real anti-Semitic nature of Zionism. And actually, while I was covering this, while I was filming this, I spoke to one of the Israeli police, one of these basically goons beating up these Jews, and I said, what are you doing? They're Jews, right? They don't want to serve in the army. That's their religious belief, right? And he said, no, they're not real Jews. We're the real Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys are convinced that that Orthodox Jews are not actually Jews, and that this nationalist version, and this guy, is wearing, he's a cop in like riot gear with like a club and a gun, and he doesn't even wear a kippah, and he's saying we are the real Jews, those ones are fake. Just amazing.
I agree with him about one thing. If he's the real Jew, we're not. One of us definitely is, and that's exactly why Zionists want you to believe that that's the real Jew, and anti-Semites want you to believe that that's the real Jew.
Exactly. And so all that to say, why I relate that to this question of, will this kind of behavior happen now, so many Jewish people leaving Israel? Yes, Israel needs Jewish bodies, and it's a good question. More and more Jewish Israelis are leaving the country because they're seeing that this is a sinking ship. I don't want to live in this under physical threat and just the constant psychological pressure of being in conflict, where I could be hit by a missile from Lebanon, or anything could happen, or the religious Zionists that are running the government are more and more restricting the freedoms that Israeli Jews have had historically, and are stripping those away and turning Israel into some kind of totalitarian, backwards regime. And these people are leaving the country, the ones who can. When I was there, I could not believe how many Israeli Jews I met who, if they're not leaving at that moment, they are looking to get out. It was honestly shocking. So as I think the conditions become more severe, you have to wonder, what will the Israeli government and its agents do to corral Jews back in?
Absolutely. What you can also expect is, and this has happened often, whenever Israel becomes more unsafe for Jews, what happens is that there's more activity of Zionists outside of Israel talking about and promoting, number one, how you better not speak bad about Israel, and number two, how Israel is a defender of Western values and democracy and stuff like that, to make it look like a desirable destination. You can expect that. You can expect legislation towards against anti-Zionism, and you could also expect a lot of propaganda regarding how Israel is just nothing to do with ideology of Zionism. It's just a bunch of liberal people in Tel Aviv sipping lattes in some cafe.
Yes, indeed. And we're actually seeing President-elect Trump, who's now stating that he will remove funding and punish universities who promote quote unquote anti-Semitism, basically who criticize Israel. So where we saw last year or earlier this year these massive demonstrations against the genocide, that is very much a ground zero for where according to this phony Zionist definition of Judaism, the Trump administration is going to crack down on quote unquote anti-Semitism, but rather anti-Zionism, or just criticism of the state of Israel. So thank you for your contribution, Brack. We also have let's see. Okay, what is this question? If Jews are just a religious group, why is Rabbi using a term like anti-Semitism, where Semitic is an adjective describing people, nothing about religion? Do you want to field that?
It's a colloquialism. If you don't like the term, don't use it. We use lots of terms that don't mean literal. I mean, I say holy cow also sometimes, even though I'm not a Hindu and I don't believe in that cows are holy. It's just a figure of speech. You don't like it, you can use some other phrase, no problem.
Right. And I mean, you can, read the history of the terminology of anti-Semitism and where it came from. And it's not to say that, the rabbi and myself are literally Semites. It's again.
No, my family's from Poland, but that's just the way it's used. There are plenty of words like that,
Exactly.
By the way, the word goodbye, if you're an atheist, you shouldn't use it. Goodbye is a abbreviation for God be with you.
Really, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
that's how it came. There are a lot of words that are just words, but it's a good point. You know, one shouldn't use that to define what Jews really are.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and a lot of people do get tripped up on it, and so maybe it's better to say, like, more accurate to say phobia or something like that. Fear. I don't know if there's a hate, a word
Hatred
that
of
means,
Jews. I don't
yeah,
know.
hatred of Jews. It doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily. It's more syllables, but nonetheless, that's what it means.
If you have a better
Um,
word, I'll use it.
let's see, what is this one? Okay, this is sort of historical. Were the Rothschilds at the time of Napoleon religious? And what about the time of the Balfour Declaration? Why do the Brits regard them as leaders of Zionism if they already were accepted by British nobles? I don't know if you want to
I'm
field
sorry.
that.
You repeat the question.
I don't know if you can read. Okay, were the
Let me get my
Rothschilds?
glasses and see if I can
Okay,
read that.
okay. At the
Well,
time
the
of
Rothschilds at the time of the Napoleon religious. I don't think they had anything to do with Napoleon. And what about the time of the Balfour Declaration? Why did the Brits regard them as leaders of Zionism if they already were accepted as loyal British nobles? I'm not sure I understand what the contradiction is between Zionism and being a loyal British noble. Also, it was Chaim Weizmann, really, that was the mover, that was the influencer for the Balfour Declaration. So, and it was written to Lord Rothschild. One has nothing to do with the other. You could be a British noble and be a leader of Zionism. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's
I'm not
not
sure.
okay. So, sorry, Martin. I apologize if we didn't quite address it as you liked. We didn't totally understand your question. Let's see. I think that is the last question we have. If anyone else has any more, feel free. But to add any super chat. I yeah. So otherwise, again, I just want to sort of emphasize that what we are seeing right now in the media, and I think it's very intentional, it's not accidental, and is this psyop of putting an anti-Semite against a Zionist, and there's a sort of under the table handshake, a tacit agreement on the fundamental principle, the fundamental lie that Zionism is Judaism, and that's
Anti-Semitism strengthens Zionism, and Zionism strengthens anti-Semitism.
precisely,
Anti-Semites want Zionism. By the way, I'll tell you.
Go ahead.
In my book, I quoted the article. Years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I did a video about a protest we made. We had, I think, 30,000 people there, more even, in New York against the draft of the Orthodox Jews in Israel. And I did a video just explaining it. The video had a couple million views. And David Duke wrote an article against me. He said that anti-Zionists should not think that Yaakov Shapiro is really an anti-Zionist. He's all for everything Israel does. He just doesn't want his people to be drafted into the army. So anti-Semites don't like when you say there's a difference between Judaism and Zionism. Anti-Semites want Zionism to be affiliated with Judaism, and Zionists want want Zionism to be affiliated with Judaism. More, Zionists want anti-Semitism because that hurts Jews to Israel, and anti-Semites want Zionists because that gives them more fodder for their anti-Semitism.
Exactly. And I find myself getting attacked, especially in recent days, by Zionists and anti-Semites who kind of, I don't know, if, ironically or funny enough, they fixate on my last name in particular because Cohen is a very typical Jewish name, and it's the Kohanim were the priests in biblical Judaism in the times of the temple. They're the ones who did the sacrifices, and so for whatever religious Zionists in particular see Kohanim as believe that I'm part of some higher sort of caste, and so because of this they hate me even more. I get a special hate, and so I get constantly direct messages on Twitter I mean, I literally have like hundreds of them. I didn't save them anywhere. They're just, and comments. Cohen, you're a Cohen. How could you? And then
That's so weird.
and then anti-Semites who will say, or Judeophobes, if we want to use that term, who will say, you're a Jew, just shout Jew, Cohen, your name is Cohen, this kind of thing. So it just totally shows that they're really of kind of, they're two sides of the same coin. So I really hope that people, watching this or who are going to watch it in the future can break free of this psyop, of this deception, and understand that it is perfectly normal and human and good to be horrified by the genocide and to reject it and to denounce it and organize against it. And we must do that. And at the same time, not fall for the Zionist trap of anti-Semitism. So to break free of this entire paradigm. So I thank you, Rabbi, again very much for your time. It's been we've been on for 2 hours now, more than 2 hours talking, and I hope it's fruitful for everyone. So thanks again to Rabbi Shapiro and everyone watching. And again, I'm Dan Cohen. This is Uncaptured Media.
And thank you again for having me.